Hello everyone and welcome to this month's free quilting project with Total Quilter and My Decorative Quilter. This month we're going to start a series of 4 quilting projects that's going to span 4 months, and the first one is going to be pillows. Now these projects were created for you by Rita Gazard and presented by myself, Mark Garretts. I'm a National Floriani educator. So you can see here we've got 4 different projects. 2 up in the upper left, those are going to be pillows. That's going to be our first project. Then we have a table runner, then we have a wall hanging, and finally a full-size quilt, all based on this same motif, so they all go together. Now, as I always like to do before we get started, I like to show you a picture of what the finished project is going to look like. So here's one of the 2 pillows that we're going to create. And this will help you get some better idea of where we're headed as we go through both the software and the construction details of the project. So let's get started with the software section of this month's project. And before we get into the details and the steps, I just want to let you know that I'm going to be using Floriani's Total Quilter to perform these steps and show you what to do. If you still have My Decorative Quilter and have not yet traded up to Total Quilter, then you're going to have to do some additional steps manually that Total Quilter does for you automatically. Now, the instructions on how to do those additional steps are in the printed instructions that you downloaded with the project, so refer back to those for the extra steps that you need to do if you have My Decorative Quilter. So the first thing we want to do is we want to create a new page, and I've already done that, but if you get a blank screen, you want to click right here and click your new icon to get a new page. Now the first thing we're going to do after that is we're going to get our screen set up and our rulers and guides and things so that we're all doing the same thing. And the first thing we want to do is make sure that we are in inches mode. If you're not, you want to right click on the top ruler bar, and throughout this lesson if I say right click, that means a right click of your mouse button, and if I just say click, that means a left click. So you want to make sure that you are in inches. You want show grid checked. You want snap to grid checked. So I'm going to go ahead and check that, and that's going to make that window go away. So I need to right click on my ruler again to bring it up. And you also want to make sure that snap to guidelines is checked and snap to anchors is checked. And then lastly, we want to come down here and click on our grid settings. We're going to use a very unusual grid setting for this project because of how we want the snap to grid to work. So what you want to do is for your horizontal spacing, we're going to set this at 3.375 inches. So I'm going to type in 3.375. And for our vertical, we want this to be 5 inches. And our grid major, we want to set this to 1 and 1. So what that means is that our grid major is going to be the same as our regular grid. And the rest of this you can leave. And you can also see here that you could also check snap to grid, snap to guidelines, and snap to anchors here. Since I've already checked them, you can see that they're all checked. So go ahead and click OK to lock those settings in. And now you can see that we have a much bigger grid than we had before. The next thing we want to do is we want to select a thread chart, and the thread chart we want to use is the Floriani cotton thread chart, and the reason we're using this right now is because it just has a fewer number of colors. It's easy to select them. So the way you select a thread chart is you come here to your thread chart selector, click it, and a list is going to come up, and you'll want to click the Floriani cotton thread chart to get that chart loaded into the software. The next thing we need to do is we need to import our artwork block. So we're going to open up an artwork file that we've already provided for you so we can trace over it to create our design. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to come here to our File menu, and we're going to click Import Artwork. And this is going to be located in your C Floriani Designs folder under the free monthly projects. So let's go there. I'm going to go to C, and then I'm going to go to Floriani, and then Designs. And I'm going to come down here to MDQ projects, and then as you know, these are separated out by month. So you're going to be looking in the March and then the March 2017 folder, and you're going to see this file here, Pillow Block FTQ .svg, and you'll see some other files in here. I haven't put them in yet, but you'll see some other files in here. But for Total Quilter, this is the one you want. So this is the base for our quilt block, and we're going to go ahead and click Open, and it's going to bring in that block for us. And what we're going to do now is we are going to use our AppliQuilt block creation tools to create this block. And those are located right here. So all of these controls right here, all these purple ones, these are our AppliQuilt controls, and we're going to use this one right here, which is called Create an AppliQuilt Block. So I'm going to go ahead and click that. And the first thing that that wants us to do is it wants us to trace the outline of the block by dragging a square. Now before I do that, you'll notice that I can see all these little nodes here, and these are the nodes that make up this shape. And now why did these nodes appear? Usually they don't, but they are appearing because we have snap to anchors turned on, and that's what snap to anchors is all about. These are nodes also known as anchors. So as we click our block creation, we can go ahead and click along these blue nodes, and our design will snap right to them to get a perfect outline of this. And so that's showing you this new snap to anchors mode. And we're also going to be using our snap to grid mode here because we're going to be snapping to our grid. So what we're going to do is we are going to first create the outline of the block, and we're going to do that by dragging a rectangle, and you can see my cursor has a little rectangle by it to remind me that that's what I need to do first. And I'm going to start up here, and I'm just going to click and hold down my mouse, and I'm going to drag a square here, a rectangle, and I don't have to be really precise because I'm going to snap to my grid lines and also my anchors, so it's going to snap right into place there. And the next thing we need to do is we need to trace over the top of these curves with our mouse in order to recreate the lines that we need for our AppliQuilt block. And where we're going to start is right here, and we're going to do a combination of regular clicks and control clicks. And by control click, I mean you're going to hold down the control key and you're going to click the mouse. All right. So most of the things that we're going to do are these control clicks, but we're going to do a few that are just regular clicks. All right. So we're going to start here, and you can start with a control click if you want. So I'm going to hold down control on my keyboard, and you can't see that I'm doing that. And so I'm going to click here, 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 here. So I'm clicking on every one of these nodes here, here, and then for this node here, I'm going to let off control and just do a regular click. Okay, so I'm going to do a regular click here, and then I'm going to do a regular click here, and then I'm going to hold down control and do a click here, and finally a click here. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to press the Enter key on my keyboard to lock in that line. So I've pressed the Enter key on my keyboard, and now what I'm going to do is draw the next line. So what I'm going to do is start here with a control click, and I'm going to keep control clicking here, 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 and as I do that, you can see that these lines go around, and as I click, the curves start to match the curve better. And I'm going to do a control click here, and then what I'm going to do is a regular click here, and then I'm going to do a regular click here. And what you'll notice is that every place that I need a sharp point, I'm doing a regular click followed by a regular click, and then I go back to control clicks. So I'm going to do a control here, and then I'm going to do a regular click here, and then I'm going to do control, control, a regular click, because this is a sharp point. I'm going to do another regular click because this is a sharp point, and then I'm going to do control, 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 control click, and then I'm going to press Enter because I've done that line. Now I'm going to come up here and do this inner one. So I'm going to hold down Control, and these are all going to be control clicks for this one. So you'll notice that I'm not bothering to get super close to these anchor points because that's what Snap to Anchors does for us. So there's actually 2 points in here. I only need one of them, and this one, and I'm going to press Enter to say that I'm done, and now I'm going to come down here and do this very last one starting down here. So I'm going to hold down Control and click, 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 and then I got a regular point here, another regular point here, and then Control, 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 click, and I'm going to press Enter to end it. And now I've entered all of my lines, and I am going to now right click to lock all those lines in. And I will have sliced up my block, and you can see here now that this is my appliquilt block, and I've got all of my slice lines in here to create my appliquilt block. So now that we've got our appliquilt block created, we're going to start decorating it and finishing up the block. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add some decorative stitches, some stippling stitches into this little curved area here. Now this is optional. You can do this if you want to, or you can leave them out. But I'm going to show you how you do that. So to start working with the lines and the fill areas of an appliquilt block, we have a very special selection tool up here called our appliquilt object selection. So this selects a block area or a line in an appliquilt block, and you don't use the normal select tool to do that. You use this select tool. So I'm going to go ahead and click it, and then I'm going to come over to this area and I'm going to click in it. And now what we're going to do is we're going to add some advanced stippling stitches to that area. So I'm going to come down here to my advanced stippling, one click, and I'm going to click it, and this window is going to open up, and we are going to scroll down. Actually, we don't need to scroll because we're going to use stipple number 10 so I can see that here. So I'm going to click that, and it's going to put that pattern in there. Now that's a very, very tight pattern. So what we're going to do is we're going to come over here to our pattern size, and we're going to put in 15.9 for our pattern size. We'll go ahead and leave our stitch length at 2.5 and click Apply, and now we've got a more reasonable sized pattern in there. The next thing we need to do is create our cover stitches. And these are also known as our appliquilt binding stitches, and these are the stitches that will go along these lines to tack the fabric down or bind the fabric down to our base stabilizer. So what we're going to do now is we're going to select all the lines because we're going to do them all at once. And we're going to do that by clicking on the very first line. So we're still in appliquilt block mode here. So I'm going to select that first line, and you can see it highlights up in yellow there. I'm going to hold down the Control key, and I'm going to click on the second one, and I'm going to click on the third one, and then I'm going to click on the fourth one. So that's all the lines that we created for this block. And now what we're going to do is we're going to add in our binding stitches, and we're going to do that by coming down to our one clicks and clicking on the motif run. And it's going to come up and automatically put in motif number 5. But for this particular project, we're going to use a different motif. So we're going to click the down arrow, and we're going to scroll down to motif 247. I went a little too far. There it is right there, 247. And we're going to change our pattern size from the default to 15 to 6. And we're going to leave our run spacing and our stitch length alone, and we are going to click Apply, and that's going to put in that stitch, which is going to become our appliquilt binding stitch. Next, what we need to do is we need to actually export this block because, believe it or not, we are done. Now before we actually do the export, I just want to mention that normally when you're creating an appliquilt block, once you're done assigning the stitches, or maybe even before, you would come into these various areas and assign fabric colors or colors to them so that when you sent them to the export dialog, it would export the cutting files as separate color pages because you'd want to cut all of the light colors together. Now we're not going to do that for a couple of reasons. Number one is we're going to change the fabric a lot, so we're going to use different types of fabric in these areas as we actually go to construct the pillow. So the colors really don't matter all that much. And the other reason is because we can easily tell which piece is which by the shape of the piece. So having them be in separate colors isn't strictly necessary. But if you want to do that, you certainly can. But we're not going to do that for this example. So we're going to go ahead and export this block. And the way we do it is with this icon right here, which is our Export Appliquilt block icon. So I'm going to go ahead and click it. And the first thing you want to do is overwrite this project name here. So we are going to call this Pillow Project. So I'm going to type that in here. And you can go ahead and leave the project folder at the default, which is Floriani Designs Appliquilt. If you want to change it, you can by clicking these little ellipses over here. You want to leave your seam allowance at 1/4 inch and go ahead and leave your spacing here at 1/4 inch. You definitely want to output your stitch files, and you want to choose the format that you would need for your particular machine. In the printed instructions, it shows it for a Viking, a VP3 format. I'm going to go ahead and leave it in this Baby Lock Brother Multi-Needle PES9 format because that's normally what I stitch with. You also want to leave the Save the WAF file checked, and this is automatically going to also save a WAF version of the stitch file. And you also want to check this As Digitized box here. This is important to get the stitches to come out in the order that we digitize them in. You probably also want to go ahead and generate your cut files, and you want to choose the format for your cutter. So you can either choose SVG if you have any style of cutter, but if you have a Brother Scan and Cut, you can also select the FCM files, which are the files that you can send directly to the Brother Scan and Cut. Most other cutters, and even the Scan and Cut, could also use this SVG. You can leave your page size at 12 by 12 if you want. You do not necessarily need to click the import files here. What this does, if you were to do that, is it would open up all these cut files immediately in the software. You can go ahead and leave Save WAF checked if you want, or you can change that to click it off. This is a new section. This is the image area. If you wanted a picture of this quilt block, you could check that and make a picture. We're not going to do that. If you don't have a cutter and you want to do manual cutting, you have two options. One would be you can click here for manual cutting and do your print from here to print your templates, but we've also provided you with the cutting files in the download, so you can just print those out on the back of your Applique Wonder or Applistick. Just remember to print them out in reverse if you're not cutting directly. So I'm going to go ahead and click Export now, and it's going to export them all here into this folder. So you can see here I've got my WAF version of the file, I have my PES version with my stitches, and I've got my pages of my cutting files both in the SVG format and also in the WAF format. So the next thing we're going to do is we're actually going to close this window and we're going to load in our stitch file. So I'm going to go ahead and click the Open, and I'm going to go to where I've got that stored, which is here in my Appliquilt under Pillow Project, and here is my stitches. So I am going to click that, and I'm going to click Open, and in a new window it's going to open up my stitch file. So this is my PES file of the stitches that are going to get generated, and we're going to do some modifications to this now. So if your grid lines have not lined up, which you can see here that they don't, what you want to do is right click on the ruler bar, come down here to grid settings, and simply click OK, and that will reset them so they line up with that image. That's just a little anomaly in the program, but that's how you get around it. And now what we want to do is go over to our sequence view, and we want to click the plus right here to expand our first item. And we are going to click on this very first run stitch, which is our outline, and we are actually going to delete that. And we're going to do that either by pressing the delete key on your keyboard, or you can come up here to your cut icon and click it. So let's do that. So we're going to go ahead and delete that. And then what we're going to do is we're going to recollapse this first item by clicking the minus here. So it's all collapsed now. And then what we're going to do is we're going to click on the very last item, which is another outline stitch here, and we're going to drag it up so it stitches out first. And so what we're going to do is drag it all the way up to all items and let off, and that's going to make it stitch out first. So what we're going to do is hold down our control key now and click the first two items in our sequence view. So I'm going to hold down control and click the first one, and then I'm going to click the second one. And what we're going to do now is change the color. So what we want to do is find the wine color here, which is right here, and we are going to click on it, and we're going to change all of those to one single stitch item and all to a single color now by doing both of those. So what we're going to do now is we're going to click on our stippling, which is this item right here. So it's in black, and we're going to go ahead and leave it in black. But what we want to do is make sure that this is centered on this line so that when we stitch out our second block and we put these two together, that the patterns line up perfectly. And you can see right here that it's off a little bit. Now if it's easier to do this, you can zoom into it. So I'm going to get my zoom tool and I'm going to drag a box around this area so you can see that this is not quite centered here. I'm going to come back and click my normal select tool, come back and click my object here, and you can either use your mouse to drag this down and get it centered. So let's see how I do doing that. So this is much easier to do when you're zoomed in, and you can see that before I let off, you can see that some of those lines have turned green. That's what happens when you are right on top of a grid line. So that's a good indication that you're in the perfect spot, and let off your mouse, and now it's perfectly centered. So when you're zoomed in, it's easy to do with the mouse. You can also use your keyboard shortcuts to do that with something we call nudging, which is holding down control and using the arrow keys on your keyboard to nudge it up or down a little bit to get it centered. So once we have done that, I'm going to double click my magnifying glass to zoom back out. And we're going to add our quilting stitches now. So to do that, we need to get a new design window. So I'm going to come up here and click New to get a new design window. So we're going to now change our grid settings again. So we're going to come up to our ruler bar and we're going to right click. And now what we want to do is make sure that inches is checked, show grid is checked. We want snap to grid check, but we want to now turn off snap to guideline. So I'll click that. I'll right click on the ruler, and we also want to turn off snap to anchor. So I'm going to click that. So both of those are off now, and I'm going to right click and go down to grid settings. And if you wanted to do this all in one step, you could have just clicked grid settings and then unchecked these. So either way you want to do it is fine. But what we're going to do now is we're going to change our grid settings again. So what we're going to do is change our spacing, and our horizontal we're going to change all the way out to 7.25 inches. And we're going to change our vertical to 0.3 inches. So widely different settings, but you're going to see why here in a second. We're going to go over to our grid major and we're going to leave this at 1, and we're going to change our vertical to 34. All right, so once we've got those in there, we're going to click OK to lock those grid settings in. And now you can see, because we're going to create our quilting stitches along these grid lines, why we have done that. So what you want to do is you need to zoom out so that you can see one of these block areas. Which one, it doesn't matter. So what we're going to do is come up here to our zoom control, and I'm just going to come down to the second item, and I'm going to click zoom out, and I can't quite see one. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to scroll up just a little bit with my scroll bars over here so I can see one of these areas. And to make this a little easier for you to see at home, now that I can see this, I'm going to get my magnifying glass and I'm going to actually zoom in to just this grid area here. All right, so now I've got it nice and in the center of my screen. I'm going to come back and select my normal select tool. Don't forget to do that. And what we're going to do next is we're actually going to start putting in some run stitches. And what we're going to do is come and select our run stitch tool. And when we click it, our cursor is going to change into a crosshair. And now wherever we click, we're going to start putting in run stitches. And we're going to use the fact that we have snap to grid turned on to put these run stitches in very, very easily. So what we're going to do is we're going to create this quilting design, and we call it linear quilting because we're going to go along these lines here. And you're going to start up here in the upper right here on the intersection of these two grid lines with a click. Then you're going to come straight across here and click. You're going to come down one grid line and click, come all the way over back to the right and click, then come down and click, come back to the left and click, and just keep doing this pattern until you get all the way down to the bottom. So I'm going to continue to do this here. And I might speed this video up so you're not having to watch me tediously do this, but I'm just clicking like this. Okay, so when you get back to this last point here and you click it, and then what you want to do is right click to lock all those stitches in. And I'll turn on 3D here for just a second so you can see that I've got my stitches in there. Now what we want to do is we want to select them all. So I'm going to come over and click my normal select tool, and I'm going to come over and make sure that they're selected, and they are here in my sequence view. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to change my stitch length to a little bit shorter to 2.5, and I'm going to click apply so we get a tighter quilting stitch. And then what we want to do is we want to save this as linear quilting. So what I'm going to do is come up here to save, and I'm going to put this in my pillow project folder here, and I'm going to call it linear quilting, and I'm going to go ahead and leave it as a WAF file. And I don't need to save this as my machine format, because what we're going to do is we're going to load this file in and put it over the top of our pattern. And you want to remember where you've saved this, because we're going to reuse this pattern for the next 3 months after this project. So this will save you from redigitizing it every time like we've done here. And by the way, we've also given you the file if you decide that you don't want to do this exercise. All right, but what we're going to do now is, since we've already got this created, normally what we would do is we would load in this file with a file merge on top of our quilt block, but we're not going to need to do that because we've already got it loaded here. So what we're going to do is we're going to come up and click our copy icon to copy it. We're going to come back to our stitches file here, and we are going to paste it. So I'm going to click the paste icon, and when I do that, it's going to come in, but it's not going to be centered over our block, and we're going to use our alignment tool to center it up over our block. So I'm going to click this alignment tool right here. I'm going to come right here to this last one, which should be next to last one, which should be the only one that's lit up, center to rulers. And our quilt block design came in centered to the ruler, so we can just go ahead and click that, and it will line it up. If I double click to zoom in, you can see what we've done here. And what we want to do is we want to now save this as our final project file, and we're going to save it in the WAF format and in our stitch format. So we're going to come up here to File, and we're going to click Save As, and we're going to call this Pillow Project Stitches.waf, and it's not already got a version of that in here, so we'll go ahead and click that to save it. And then what we're going to do is we're going to save this as our stitch file. And so again, I'm going to come here to File and then Save As, and I'm now going to change my format to my PES version 9, and I am going to save that. And it says it already exists here, and it's okay for me to overwrite it because this is what I actually want to stitch. So I'm going to say yes, and that is the software instruction set for this month's project. So now we're going to move on to the construction details for this month's project, and we're going to start with the materials that you're going to require. Now this list applies to this month and the next 3 months' projects. So you're going to need some Floriani embroidery batting. You're going to need some Floriani nylon no-show mesh stabilizer. Color doesn't matter, but you want the non-fusible stabilizer. You're also going to want some Floriani Applique Wonder or Quilter Select Applistick, so either one of those two products that you prefer to use. You're going to need some Quilter Select Perfect Cotton Plus. That's our new 60 weight cotton thread for the top thread, and you're going to want our Quilter Select Para Cotton Poly for the bobbin thread. And you'll want to choose colors that work well with your fabric choices. You'll ideally want some Quilter Select rulers, mats, and rotary cutters. You'll need a 7.5 by 10 inch or 185 by 260 millimeter or larger hoop size. Note that you can reduce the designs for a smaller hoop size, but it will reduce the amount of fabric that you need as well. And then lastly, you're probably going to want a walking foot to do your quilting stitches to finish the project. So now we're going to go over our fabric details. Again, this is for all 4 projects. You're going to need some light colored fabric, 5.5 yards of that, medium colored fabric, 2.5 yards, dark colored fabric, 3 3/4 yards. You'll need 2.5 yards for your mock binding. Your backing fabric, you'll need 5.5 yards, and you're going to need 2 11-inch sections of Velcro. Pick a color that matches your back fabric the best. Your fabric yardage that we've given you here is generous to account for the different cutting techniques, and if you want to see the complete details, see the project overview that you downloaded in the February 2017 project folder. So next we want to prepare our fabric, and you'll want to refer to the second page of that overview section. Again, you've downloaded that in the February 2017 project folder. You'll want to cut out the fabric shapes and the matching pieces of either Applique Wonder or Applistick according to the pillow column that's in the overview, and you can either use a digital cutter or the templates that were provided in this month's project files if you're cutting them by hand. From the light cut fabric, you also want to cut 4 1.5 inch by 11.5 inch strips and 4 1.5 inch by 17 inch strips. From the dark fabric, you're going to cut 4 2 inch by 12 inch strips, 4 4 inch by 18 inch strips, 2 12 inch by 18 inch backing pieces. From the Floriani embroidery batting, you're going to cut out 2 19 inch squares and cut 4 sections of nylon no-show mesh larger than your hoop size, because that's what we're going to hoop up. Again, all of these quantities here, these are for both pillows that we are going to make in this month's project. And before we start embroidering, I just want to let you know that some of the color changes in these files are in the design just in order to make the machine stop between the steps. So you have the option of leaving the same thread in, or you can change it if you desire. But if you have a multi-needle machine, it's important that you use your machine controls to insert stop commands to make the machine stop between the colors. Otherwise, it's just going to continue to stitch on and you won't be able to put your fabric pieces down, etc. So to embroider the design, first you want to load the pillow block design into your machine. Hoop up a piece of Floriani nylon no-show mesh stabilizer, get it nice and tight, and attach the hoop to the machine. And then go ahead and stitch out the first color, which will be the placement lines for the shapes, and we call that the skeleton. So next you want to take the hoop out of the machine and then peel the backing paper off the shapes that you've cut out to expose the adhesive, and then you'll carefully want to place those shapes within the placement lines, and you might find it easier to start with the light colored V-shaped fabric first, and then you want to optionally press them to secure them a little bit better to the stabilizer. Now you can change the upper thread if you want, and then return the hoop to the machine and stitch out the next color to stitch the optional decorative stitching if you've done that step. Again, you can change the upper thread color if you desire, and then go ahead and stitch the next color for the binding or cover stitches. Once again, you can change the upper thread color if you desire and stitch the next color, which is going to stitch out our linear quilting stitches. So that actually completes our embroidery for our first block, and you want to repeat it 3 more times for a total of 4 sections. 2 of these sections are going to use dark fabric for the centers and medium fabric for the sides, and the other 2 will use medium fabric for the centers and dark fabric for the sides. You can see the pictures here. We put the two like sections together, and you can see the red dotted line so you can see how they'll end up, but it's a total of 4 sections. So next what we're going to do is take them all out of the hoop, and then from the back side you want to trim each block 1/4 inch from the seam line. Next you'll want to get 2 of the matching blocks and sew them together on the half circle side using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then go ahead and press that seam open. Once you've done that, you want to take this block and you want to center it on a 19-inch square of batting right sides up, and then take your walking foot and stitch in the ditch at the middle seam to secure the batting. Next you'll want to line up the 1.5 by 11.5 inch strips at the top and the bottom of the block right sides together, and then sew everything together with a 1/4 inch seam allowance and press the strips open. Next you're going to repeat that with the 1.5 inch by 17 inch strips, but now on the sides of the block. Next you'll want to place a quilter select ruler so an edge is 3/4 of an inch above the seam line, and draw a line, and then you want to repeat that for the remaining sides of the block so you have this line drawn in a rectangle all around the edges of the block 3/4 inches away from the seam line. So next you're going to want to line up the outer edges of the 2-inch by 12-inch strips on those drawn lines at the top and the bottom right sides together, and then sew together using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then press them open. Now you want to repeat that same step, but this time use the 4-inch by 18-inch strips and do it on the sides. Now for a nice finished look, if you want to, you can mimic the block's linear quilting on the borders using your sewing machine. Next you'll want to place a quilter select ruler so an edge is 1.25 inches above the top seam line, and trim off the excess fabric, and repeat that at the bottom, and then do the same for the sides, but measure 3.25 inches instead from the seam lines. Next you want to get one piece of your backing fabric, put it wrong side up, and fold over 3/4 of an inch along the long side. Next you want to press that fold into place, then fold it over another 3/4 of an inch and press, and then stitch the folds together near the edge of the fold, and then repeat that for the other piece of the backing fabric. Next take one of the pieces and on the wrong side of the backing, center the soft or loop side of the 11-inch Velcro strip on the folded edge that we just made, and sew that strip into place. So now on the right side of the other backing piece, center the hook side of the Velcro strip on the folded edge and sew that in place. Now you're going to flip the A side backing right side up and place it on the B side, match up the Velcro strips, and finger press them together to secure them into a single piece. Next you'll want to center the front and back sides of the pillow together with their right sides together, and then pin it in place. Position with the front side up, and then sew them together on all sides using a 1/4 inch seam allowance measured from the inside edge of the batting piece. And as you can see here when we talk about centered, the two pieces are different sizes, so they're not going to line up. You just want to center them together. Next you'll want to trim away the excess backing fabric, and then carefully trim the corners of the batting away, taking care not to trim the seams, and then pull the Velcro apart and turn it inside out. All that remains is to get an 18-inch pillow form and place it inside, or another option is to buy a cheap standard bed pillow and stuff that inside. And then lastly, you want to make another pillow using the remaining 2 blocks. So that completes our 2 pillows for this month's project. We want to thank you for attending. We'll hope you use this video along with the printed PDF instructions to recreate this project at home. And of course, we want to invite you back next month for the next project in our series, which is going to be a matching wall hanging.